Hi, I'm John, one of the Highrock pastors, and I'm so glad to be with you. The story we just heard is really just a small piece of a much larger story. In fact, the story of Joseph and his brothers spans 14 whole chapters of the book of Genesis, and we have to cover a lot for us just to understand what happened in the scene we just read. Or maybe it's the other way around. When we understand this snapshot, this moment of Joseph and Judah's lives, perhaps we will understand the rest of their lives in light of this moment. Sometimes a single moment sheds light on the entire story. In my own story, many of you have heard me share about my brother Eugene. I'm the oldest of three boys, and Eugene was the classic middle child. My youngest brother Sean and I were both wicked smart, but Eugene was treated as if his head was filled with rocks because he was only slightly less smart. In fact, when Eugene was only 18 months old, he became really sick and was taken to the hospital for almost a month. With a sustained fever of over 106, the doctors thought he wouldn't make it. And even when he did manage to beat the odds, the doctors warned my parents that he might have brain damage. I don't know if he did, but I do know that I treated him as if it were true. It's a cruel world, and sometimes even home isn't safe. After becoming a believer as an adult, I grew more and more aware of the pain I had caused my brother. But part of me still wanted to excuse my actions. After all, I was just picking up on what I sensed from the adults. So was it really their fault, right? Well, to further complicate matters, just like we'll see in Joseph's and Judah's story, my parents had favorites. Our dad gave special attention to Eugene. It seemed so unfair, and I resented Eugene for it. But when I became a believer, I lost my patience for all of those excuses. My brother was in pain, and I was a source of much of that pain. So I went to him, and I confessed the many things I remembered doing to him, and I apologized. No excuses. I told him how sorry I was, and I asked him to please forgive me. With tears in his eyes and zero hesitation, he forgave me. Such a brief moment in our lives, and yet you can know so much from just that snapshot. I imagine it's the same for many, maybe all of you. There are some moments that echo throughout the rest of our lives, like dropping a rock into a pond, the ripples spread out and even bounce back. For some of you, there was something your parents said or did, and flashes of that moment still haunt you. Or maybe you were a latchkey kid, feeling overlooked or even ignored. Or maybe you wanted to be ignored because being invisible felt safer than encountering an angry gaze. Or maybe you had difficult relationship with your siblings. Maybe you were like me, a little too aggressive, a little too competitive, a little too resentful and cruel. Or maybe you were like my brother, your pain magnified by a sensitive heart. Or maybe it was other kids. You know, the school bus can be a hotbed of savagery. Or maybe the playground was like your own scene from Lord of the Flies. Or maybe you just grew up not fitting in anywhere. Perhaps your family kept moving and you had to start over and over. Some people have trouble fitting in at all, and you just can't seem to make a connection with others or even themselves. Maybe you didn't feel like you fit in anywhere, not even your own family, not even in your own body. What do we do with such pain? Some of us get crushed by the weight of it all. Others, like me, just crush others. From a very early age, I learned that I could escape my pain by inflicting that pain on someone else. By inflicting my pain on someone else, I didn't feel so alone. After all, if you feel the pain that I feel, at least I know that you know how I feel. It's a twisted logic that makes sense only to a broken heart. I know that when I became a believer, I was hoping that Jesus would just heal all of that pain, that it would all go away. I hoped that I could just be so spiritual that all that junk from the past would fade away like the last vestiges of winter snow on a warm spring day. I wanted to leave the past in the past. I wanted to be done with it. But I was coming to realize that I had to look back in order to move forward. I wanted happiness, but what I needed was healing. There was no escaping that I had to look back at my past in order to truly embrace the future into which Jesus was inviting me. Many of you have experienced that same truth. We're currently exploring the Bible in a series called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. We all want to be spiritually mature. We want spiritual strength, but try as we might, it's impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally unhealthy. The Bible shares story after story where spiritual heroes wrestle with and often succumb to unhealed emotional wounds. I was experiencing it in my life, especially in my relationship with my brother Eugene. Many of you are painfully aware of that same dynamic in your own lives. And we'll see that same dynamic playing out in Joseph's and Judah's story. In the Bible and in our lives, we so often need to look back in order to move forward. We need to confront the past with courage and honesty so we might finally experience and embrace the incredible future that God intends for us. So what's going on in this story? At this moment, Joseph is the prime minister over Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. But Judah doesn't recognize his own brother Joseph. And why would he? Judah thought Joseph was either dead or a slave. In fact, Joseph has 11 brothers, and all of them assumed that they would never see Joseph again. As Judah steps in to rescue his brother Benjamin, Judah shares a detail that centers the entire story and exposes the deep wound that runs through their entire family. He says, "My father said to us, 'As you know, my wife had 2 sons.'" First of all, their father Jacob had 2 wives and 12 sons. Long story short, Jacob had fallen in love with Rachel. But Rachel had an older sister, Leah. And their father tricked Jacob into marrying Leah, but then gave Rachel to him as a second bride. And you thought your family was dysfunctional? So when Jacob says, "My wife had 2 sons," he is counting only his wife Rachel as a true wife, and thus only 2 of his sons as real sons. Joseph was the first son of that beloved wife Rachel. Judah was the 4th child of the unloved wife, Leah. And that's why Jacob loved Joseph the most, and after him, the other child of Rachel, Benjamin. But Judah and all the other brothers hated Joseph because of this favoritism. And that fancy robe of Joseph's, that robe signified that Joseph had been designated as the firstborn, the future patriarch of the family, elevated above all his brothers. I shared with you how my own father showed favoritism toward my brother Eugene. What I couldn't see is that my father was trying to make up for some of the even more extreme favoritism that my mother was showing to me. I wish someone had told me. But my dad didn't even realize how his actions towards Eugene made me feel. And I never told him how I felt, because nobody in my family seemed to tell anyone else how they were feeling unless they were screaming in anger. But Joseph's and Judah's story, far more extreme. Joseph was being elevated at a cost to everyone else. And to make matters worse, young Joseph had a God-given ability to interpret dreams and read signs. But somehow he couldn't see how angry this was making his brothers when his dreams were of ruling over them. I want to reach into the page and shake Joseph. Wake up, dude. Stop reading dreams and read the room. Well, fed up with it all, Judah and the other brothers decided to kill Joseph. And at the last moment, they changed their minds and decided to sell him as a slave instead. In fact, slavery was Judah's idea. But God was with Joseph. Miraculously, he rose out of slavery to become the right hand to Pharaoh. God gave Joseph this ability to interpret Pharaoh's prophetic dream. In fact, Pharaoh rewarded Joseph by putting him in charge of everything, including all the preparations during the 7 years of bumper crops so that they might be prepared for the 7 years of famine that would follow. 2 years into that eventual famine, Jacob decided to send his sons to Egypt to ask for some grain. But their father Jacob wouldn't let Benjamin go with his brothers. After losing Joseph, Benjamin was his only remaining connection to his beloved wife Rachel, who died giving birth to Benjamin. When Joseph saw his brothers, he immediately recognized them. But a decade had passed, and with the Egyptian makeup and wardrobe change, they understandably fail to recognize Joseph. I can't imagine how tense and painful that moment must have been for Joseph. At one point, he had to hide his tears. Later on, he would have to leave the room as he broke down and wept. Even after a decade, the wounds were still fresh. After regaining his composure, Joseph came up with a plan. He wanted to test his brothers. By challenging their story and accusing them of being spies, he got them to admit that they have a father back at home, plus one more brother, Benjamin. At that point, Joseph forced them to agree to bring Benjamin back with them in order to test them. Would they hate Benjamin just like they hated Joseph? Or had they changed? These are supposed to be some of the great heroes of the faith. Instead, it seems more like a chapter out of a family power struggle in The Sopranos or Succession. The Bible doesn't gloss over the ugliness of our world. It makes me wonder why we spend so much time and effort trying to conceal our brokenness in the hopes of looking more mature and spiritual. The only spiritual people in the Bible are those whose brokenness is brought to the surface and exposed so that it might finally be healed. So the brothers brought Benjamin back with them, which brings us to the scene we read today. They still don't realize that Pharaoh's prime minister is none other than their brother Joseph, but it's not time for the big reveal. So Joseph sends them back home again with all of the grain that they need, but he also adds one special gift. Into Benjamin's sack, he places his own special cup, an object likely of incredible value. Benjamin is being framed for a capital crime. And when Benjamin's crime is discovered, what would his other brothers from other mothers do? Would they celebrate the removal of daddy's favorite? Or would something better than resentment and jealousy be revealed? And that's where we come, finally, to the encounter in today's text. First, the brothers know that none of them stole Joseph's cup, but they can't rule out divine intervention. Their first reaction is that this must be God punishing them for their sins. Judah says, "My Lord, what can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God is punishing us for our sins." What sins? The implication throughout the entire story is that their guilt for what they did to Joseph is continually just underneath the surface. They carried this guilt for years, and they just can't shake the sense of God's displeasure. In order to move forward, sometimes the past we have to face is not a history of being a victim, but being the oppressor. When I went to my brother Eugene and confessed, I did so because the closer I got to God, the harder it was to ignore the injustices that I carried with me. I wanted to bury my past, but what we think is dead and buried has a funny way of coming back to life in God's hands. That's one reason we have to look back in order to go forward. The more I walked with God, the more painful it would become unless I confessed the truth and sought forgiveness from my brother. More than any of his other brothers, it seems that Judah is the one who has done the work necessary to move forward. Judah wasn't the oldest. He was the fourth son. But for reasons that we'll see in a moment, he might have been the most spiritually mature. It's Judah who speaks to Joseph on behalf of his other brothers. It's Judah that volunteers to do the hard thing, the loving thing. This same Judah who came up with the idea to sell Joseph into slavery, this same Judah would now rather become a slave than allow Benjamin to experience a similar fate. Why? What changed? Had he grown to become a better person? Maybe. Was he exhausted from carrying all the guilt? I'm sure that was part of it. But the ultimate reason seems to be love. Love for Benjamin? Possibly. If not Benjamin, then love for whom? For his father Jacob? Yes, for his father, his very dysfunctional father. Judah offers himself as a substitute for Benjamin for one clear reason: because he loved his father Jacob. For years he had seen his father suffer in anguish from the loss of Joseph. And the unfairness of it all could have driven Judah to just become resentful and bitter. But instead, his pain helps him become more tender and compassionate. Think about that. Jacob's preference for Joseph and Benjamin wasn't fair. Jacob's preference for Rachel and rejection of Leah wasn't fair. It was this unhealed wound in Jacob, their father, that in turn wounded everyone else. Even in this encounter, Judah is reminded of this injustice from his father. Listen how Judah recounts this story to Joseph. Then my father said to us, "As you know, my wife had 2 sons." With Joseph gone and Rachel gone, the only thing that matters is Benjamin. The rest of the family might just as well not exist. For the love of this father, Judah is willing to sacrifice himself. Judah will sacrifice himself for Benjamin because he loves his father that much, even if his own father does not return that same kind of love. This transformation in Judah is so powerful that even Joseph couldn't hold it in any longer. We're told that he cleared the palace and broke down so completely that even outside the palace, the Egyptians could hear his wailing. They appear to be tears of healing. He has faced the pain and finally gone through the pain to the healing that God has for him on the other side. He had to look back in order to move forward. And at the end of it, Joseph declares to his brothers, "Don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives." Later, after their father had passed away, Joseph repeated this assurance, telling them that the very evil that they intended to do, God intended for good. Joseph didn't gloss over what they had done. It wasn't a, hey, no harm, no foul, or mistakes were made kind of situation. Joseph faced the truth and rightly called what they did evil. The fact that God brought good out of it didn't make what they did good. God had redeemed their evil, giving it meaning and purpose. It's a very mature, healthy, and godly perspective, and one that Joseph came to only through much pain and bitter tears. In fact, in parting with his brothers, Joseph cried again. After weeping with joy over seeing Benjamin, the brother from the same mother, Joseph then kissed all of his brothers, crying over them as well. I remember tears with my brother Eugene, tears for both of us. I had been tempted to settle for a fake forgetfulness rather than real forgiveness. I had wanted to sweep it all under the rug. The past is the past and all of that. But in choosing to honestly confront the past and to call evil evil, we were able to move through the pain to the beginnings of real healing. But again, what about Judah in this story? We can see what happened in Joseph's heart. Did God give Judah the same kind of clarity? Honestly, I don't know. We're not told. But I suspect that Judah learned to love broken people and to see God in the process through his own mother, Leah. Rachel, the mother of Joseph and Benjamin, was the beloved wife. Judah's mother, Leah, was the wife who was perpetually unloved. In fact, she craved her husband's approval so much that she named her first 3 children like prayers for Jacob's love. With her first child, she gave him a name that sounds like the Hebrew for "he has seen my misery." Surely Jacob will love me now, right? Sadly, no. With her second son, she named him Simeon, which means one who hears, as in how God now has heard her prayer for another son to make Jacob love her. But no, Jacob still loved only Rachel. With son number 3, Leah names him Levi, which means attached, because she thought finally her husband might become attached to her. After 3 failed attempts to secure the love of Jacob, she finally learned to sing a different tune. She didn't stop loving her husband, but she did stop putting her hopes and her identity in him. Instead, she put her heart into God's hands, the only one who had ever truly loved her all along. With her 4th child, Leah said, "This time I will praise the Lord." She named him Judah, which means simply praise God. Leah knew what it was to love someone who would not, or perhaps could not, love her in the same way. But along the way, she learned to move through that pain, to confess it, and to declare, this time I will put my life in God's hands. Maybe Judah learned that same powerful lesson from his mother. Maybe Leah taught him the very lesson embedded into his name, that when we love people, we must not put our life's meaning into their hands. Only God can bear that weight. Only God deserves that kind of worship. It must have pierced Judah's heart deeply to be reminded that his own mother would never have that kind of love from Jacob. I can barely imagine the pain he must have felt knowing that his own father would never love him like he loved his brothers from another mother. But just like Joseph's pain led to the saving of many lives, Judah's pain would likewise lead to the saving of many, though it would take quite a few more years. Long after Judah's life was over, one of his descendants would lay down his life for the sake of his brothers and sisters, all out of love for his father. You see, Jesus would be born not from Rachel's line, not from Joseph's line. Instead, Jesus would be born as the Lion of Judah. Jacob chose Joseph to be his firstborn, but God chose to honor Judah instead. God honored Leah, the wife who was not loved. God chose to honor Judah, the one who was willing to sacrifice himself for his brothers out of love for his father. When I faced the sin of my own past with my brother Eugene, God opened up a future that I could not have imagined. I didn't want to face the past. The past was filled with too much pain. I wanted happiness. But what I needed was healing. And it was only in looking back that I could finally move forward into a better future. My brother Eugene later became my best friend. He became a lifeline during one of the most difficult times in my life, and the life of my family as well. When he passed in 2008, even our autistic daughter Eliza seemed overcome with grief at his loss. I don't know where your story might lead. No one but God could have known where my story would take me. God wants us to face our past, not to hurt us, but to heal us, to prepare us for a better future. If you are willing to face your past, God might open up your story to possibilities that you can't even imagine right now. No one but God could have known where redemption and healing would take Joseph and Judah. God is the author of your story too. And in facing the past, you might finally find yourself in a new chapter. For some of you, looking back to move forward might just mean talking with a trusted friend or an advisor. If you don't know who you can talk to, maybe start with a pastor or sign up to meet with our spiritual guides who are a wonderful resource. Some of you are in small groups to which you can turn. There are a number of weekly groups that are even discussing this material as we go through this series, including an online group as well. For some of you, more dedicated help might be important. Therapy or mental health services could be invaluable. They have been for me at numerous points in my journey. But for all of us, it's going to take courage and honesty. For Joseph and Judah, and for me, we had to name what was evil in order to fully experience the redemption that was possible with God. In their stories and in mine, we weren't just victims, we were victimizers as well. This isn't a story of finding someone to blame. Instead, we have to be honest about what is wrong so we might finally experience how God can make it right, how God can make us right and whole. I know that for some people, one of the scariest dimensions of looking back is that it can make us feel so small, weak, and vulnerable. It can open up wounds and questions about whether we are worth anyone's time or attention or love. And if that's you, I hope you can remember that in all of these stories today, God loved the unloved. God honored Leah, the wife who was not loved, especially when she put her hopes and her heart into God's hands. God honored that very child, Judah, even though he felt unloved by his own father. And my brother Eugene and I, each of us feeling unloved in different ways, discovered an even deeper love for each other and for God. In facing the ways that we all felt unloved, each of us found an even deeper love in God. One final encouragement. When you do look back in order to move forward, when you face the pain of your past with courage and honesty, you'll not just find love from God. You will find that you have an increased capacity to love others, maybe even a new capacity to love. I share these words as a closing encouragement to everyone who is willing to choose healing over momentary happiness. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. May God's comfort transform your pain into power to love others in the very way you wish to be loved. Amen.